And so now we come to the final question. Which is better? Is it open source or proprietary? Welcome to another episode of GeekOutdoors.com. So today I'm going to be talking about open source software versus proprietary software for YouTube content creators. Now, if you don't know what open source and proprietary means, in general, open source software means that the actual code or the source code to create the program is actually openly available for anyone to see on the internet. And at the same time, you could actually edit and modify the code with certain rules and guidelines. Now, proprietary software or closed software means that you cannot see the code unless you're actually working for that business or the owners of that software. And so it's not something that can be seen or modified by the public. And so some examples of open source and proprietary is, first off, Android. Now, the base Android operating system is open source, so this actual operating system software can be used by anyone and can be edited with certain rules and guidelines. Now, proprietary software are things like Microsoft Windows and Apple Mac OS. It means that you cannot see the code and you definitely can't make any changes to it. And so that is the general of open source versus proprietary. So now I'm going to talk about the software that I use to do YouTube as a content creator. And so this is the software that I use 99% of the time as a YouTube content creator. And so first off, the operating system that I use is Linux Mint. And so I don't use Apple Mac and I don't use Microsoft Windows as my primary operating system. Second to that are obviously my video editors. And so my video editors of choice are Kdenlive and Shotcut. And then for my screen recording, I use OBS. And then finally, for any audio editing needs, I use Audacity. So the combination of all these open source software is what I primarily use day in and day out. And it allows me to create the 1,000+ videos that I have here on YouTube and other places on the internet. So this is a great combination of tools, and they're all open source software. And so for 1% of the time, I use proprietary software. So the operating system that I use here is Microsoft Windows 10. And then for my video editor, I use DaVinci Resolve. And so this is something that I have been doing for a while now. I've always had Linux Mint as my primary operating system. And then secondary, I've used Microsoft Windows whenever there's software there that I need. Now let me talk about the pros of using open source software, and then some of the realities of using both open source software and proprietary software as a YouTube content creator. Now here are some of the biggest pros with using open source software. The first being that most open source software is free, which is probably the best thing out of all the open source software, is that a lot of the software that you're going to find and use, they're all freely available for you to use without having to pay for any fees or licensing in the future. And then the second great thing about open source software is, well, they're overall really excellent pieces of software. All the software that I talked about that I use, they are amazing software, and you would be hard pressed to find really any issues with not paying for it versus paying for it. And so that is another big plus. And then another thing is the overall community. The open source community is composed of people who are freely giving their time to produce this software, to support it, and to help a lot of people who actually use the software all around the world. And so it is a wonderful community overall. And then the final thing with open source software is the whole freedom aspect. This is something that is huge for a lot of people who love using open source software, because they really feel that having open source software gives a lot more visibility, gives more transparency, and it allows more people to actually be involved in the whole process and also feel like they are part of this entire worldwide global community. And it all goes back to the whole idea of having freedom versus being stuck in a platform or ecosystem that keeps you tied down, which leads me to proprietary software. And when it comes to the pros of using proprietary software, there's lots of similarities with open source software, mainly being the fact that there is a lot of excellent software in the proprietary world as well. And a good example for me is DaVinci Resolve. This is a fantastic and powerful video editor, and it is proprietary. And the second pro is the fact that most people still use proprietary software. So what that means is there's normally going to be more money spent in this area, hence more support, compatibility, and overall visibility in the whole software world. So those are the main pros that I see with using proprietary software. For serious YouTubers, check out TubeBuddy, the premier tool used at geekoutdoors.com. Get more done today by checking out the affiliate link in the description area below. And so now I want to talk about an aspect of open source software that is really valuable to a lot of people in that community, and it's this whole idea of freedom. Now, I briefly talked about that a little bit earlier, but what does this really mean to you as a YouTube content creator or just a user in general? Well, for my example, all the software that I primarily use, the open source software, I'm freely able to move around and use or not use that software, and I'm not really locked in or tied into any of that software or ecosystem. Versus if you're using more proprietary software and ecosystems like, say, the Adobe Suite software or the Apple ecosystem or Microsoft Windows or Google ecosystem, a lot of that is proprietary, and more often than not, you're locked into that, and it's really hard for you to actually move around or use something else. So it kind of restricts you from having freedom of using what you want, when you want, and where you want, versus more open source options where you don't really have those limitations. And that's not to say that open source is all free and open, because there's definitely some open source software that's not. But in general, I really feel that is a very powerful thing for you to think about as a creator and as a user. And so now we come to the final question. Which is better? Is it open source or proprietary? Well, in my humble opinion, the best software is the one that works best for you and your needs, whether that's open source or proprietary, because at the end of the day, these are tools. These are tools that you use in your daily life to work and just to enjoy the lifestyle that you have. And the reality is, a lot of the world runs on both open source and proprietary software. And at least for me, I want to have the freedom to choose whatever software that I want, whether it's open source or proprietary. And then as a creator, I really feel that you might want to give open source software a look, because I think a lot of times people aren't aware that they could do everything by using open source software to be a creator, and they think that they have to get into more of these proprietary systems and pay a lot of money to actually create the things that they want here on YouTube and other platforms. So those are my thoughts on using open source software versus proprietary software as a YouTube content creator. So if you actually had any thoughts on this, be sure to leave that in the comments area below. And if you wanted to see more of my YouTube tutorials, tips, and thoughts, I do have a playlist. I'll leave that in the description area below. So as always, if you did get value out of these videos, be sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hey geeks, if you are a creative geek like me and you wanted to learn how to create content on YouTube and other places on the internet, then check out my Go Content Creators group, where you'll get access to additional videos and content for all the creative geeks out there. And the best part of it is, all of this is free. Simply head over to the link below, check out my page, and sign up for my Go Content Creators group. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the other side.